D2 Coast 04. This map was actually the first area of coast that we built, before the crane and other elements existed. The drained seabed and rusted ships were some of the earliest pieces of art direction we developed. Years later, we showcased the map in our 2003 E3 demonstration, though much of the gameplay was still being figured out at the time. As a result, when we began building out the entire coast section, that demonstration became a useful vision for us to work toward.
Audio over distance. The large-scale spaces in the coast maps led us to seek an audio solution for how sound changes over distance. So, for instance, in these maps, an enemy can be well over 100 yards away, and their gun should sound different at that range than when it's up close. We decided to store our sounds in a single stereo file with the near sound in the left channel and the far sound in the right channel. And then during playback, we crossfade, or we change the proportion of sound you hear between those two channels based on the player's distance from the sound. And it was a simple solution that worked well. It helped us with memory constraints. You can easily hear it in action. Just listen to how a combine soldier's gunshots change as you drive towards them.
We wanted the buggy to be more than just a means of travel, so we decided to attach a gun to it. We chose the Tower Cannon, a Half-Life 1 weapon we liked but hadn't found a place for it in Half-Life 2. The Tower Cannon can shoot through walls, which makes it tricky for level design, so we limited it to the coast section. Once you introduce wall-penetrating weapons, level design becomes much tougher. Furthermore, we mounted an ammunition crate on the back of the buggy, giving the player unlimited SMG ammo throughout coast. This was especially helpful for playtesters who struggled with the infinite antlions spawning from the sand.
crane. The crane took a lot of fine-tuning to get right. Something that needed to generate so much physical force was always risky, given the limitations of our rigid body physics and destruction technology. For example, the magnet was never going to fully meet player expectations for something with that much mass. But because the crane was stationary, we could carefully choose everything within its range and fine-tune as needed. Fortunately, most players didn't seem to notice its rougher edges, likely because of the sheer novelty of interacting with something like it in a vaguely realistic physics environment.
Ramming with the buggy. Our physics system is based on rigid bodies, which means it doesn't support any deformation or destruction of objects. If a physical object is hit by something, it can move if allowed, but otherwise nothing happens. So, when you drive the buggy through a glass window, we have to employ some trickery to make things work as expected. Because the window is fixed in place, the physics simulation will actually bounce the buggy off the window. But it does notify our game system that a collision occurred. The game system handles destruction, so it breaks the window into glass shards and tells the physics system to start simulating them. Crucially, the game system also tells the physics system to restore the buggy's state to where it was before the collision. This ensures that the next time physics is simulating, the buggy will drive freely through the now destroyed window. This process does produce a one-frame hitch in the buggy's physics, as it briefly stops and is teleported back to the instant before the impact. We're sorry if knowing this has made Half-Life 2 totally unplayable, but after watching playtests at the time, we decided we actually liked the momentary hitch. It added to the sense of impact.
Opportunistic moments. Some memorable moments in the game come from the interactions of multiple game systems, but sometimes we realize these moments are likely to happen only rarely. When that's the case, we often wish more players would experience them. There's a tension here. The more we know players will encounter something, the more effort we can put into it. But if it feels too artificial, the moment can come across as forced, and players may not respond as positively. The Gunship cinematic death is an example where we nudge things a bit, trying to increase the chances of a memorable moment without being too obvious. The design of this area and the gunship's flight path make it likely that the player and the gunship are in the right spots when it dies. If they are, we trigger the gunship's crash into the cars. If not, it dies in the usual way. It's totally gamey, but playtesters didn't seem to mind when the moment played out well.
Roller mines. Roller mines were created to fill the need for an enemy that could threaten players while driving the buggy. Since the player in the buggy was essentially a fully physically simulated entity, we thought it would be interesting to also have a physically simulated enemy. The manhack had already shown us how this approach could lead to an enemy with lots of interesting interactions with the world. So we built the roller mine, a ball whose movement is entirely driven by generating torque on itself, and iterated on its behavior until it was fun to drive against. Roller mines aren't particularly dangerous to the buggy, but if you let them stack up, they can become a problem, especially near a cliffside. We also made sure they worked well when the player's on foot, allowing level designers to get a few extra encounters out of them.
Ambush. One of the general challenges of a Half-Life style FPS is that the player is constantly moving forward into spaces they don't know. This means that when they find themselves in combat, they're in unfamiliar areas with no knowledge of how to approach the fight. We use many different methods to help the player with this problem, and this ambush is one example. Upon arrival, the player fights a group of Combine among these houses. During the fight and the exploration afterward, the player has the chance to learn the arena layout. Then, when the player explores up into this attic, we spawn a second wave of Combine. In that second fight, the player now has the advantage of knowing the layout, allowing them to make more tactical decisions in defending against the ambushers.
Crossbow. This is the player's first opportunity to get the crossbow in the game, and looking back, it's somewhat surprising we didn't gate it. It's entirely possible for the player to drive right past it. To make that less likely, we set up the roadblock and vantage point to encourage players to get out of the buggy, at which point they'd spot the crossbow and item crate. Playtesting showed that almost every player stopped and collected the weapon, but this is a case where the difference between playtesting and real play might matter. A playtester who's been playing since the start of Coast may not be as fatigued with exploration as someone who's been playing from the very beginning of the game. So, we placed another crossbow a few levels ahead, directly on the player's path in Nova Prospect.
Gas station. We had grand plans for this encounter. We envisioned building a gas station that the player would fight around, likely igniting the gas tanks and setting fire to everything. We imagined the player driving away from a raging fire, but budget and performance were harsh constraints in 2003, and the station had to keep getting smaller and simpler to fit into Coast's large levels. Our plans for a dynamic fire system didn't materialize, and building it no longer made sense. There's always a limit to how much work we can justify for a single encounter. In the end, the only remnants of our original vision are the explosive gas tanks.
Area portals. One performance challenge we faced in Coast was handling wide open spaces that included buildings with highly detailed interiors, or at least they were detailed by 2003 standards. When the player was outside, we wanted to allocate as much of our budget as possible to rendering that space, without losing resources to the building interiors. But unless we were willing to board up every window and door, the player could still see inside. To solve this, we created a feature called area portals, placing one in every open window and door. An area portal pre-computes a flat image of the building's interior, and during play, when the player is some distance away, the area portal displays this pre-computed image over the window or door, allowing us to skip rendering the actual interior. As the player approaches, we smoothly crossfade between the area portal's image and the building's actual contents. With careful use, area portals helped us to meet our performance goals on Coast, along with the occasional door that closed itself behind you.
Occlusion. In Half-Life 1 and much of Half-Life 2, the world consisted mainly of enclosed tunnels and corridors, which worked well with a binary space partition, or BSP tree. Essentially, this tech allowed us to quickly sort through the geometry and determine what might be visible in the player's view. But the open areas in Coast and other outdoor sections didn't suit that approach, so we needed some new tech. Area portals were one, allowing us to carve out the world into discrete chunks separated by portals. Doors and windows, that is, not aperture science ones. We also developed an additional occlusion system, which basically said that if the player can't see through, over, or around a large object, don't render what's on the other side. This might seem an obvious thing not to do, but it takes some work to make sure that calculating what's on the other side of the big thing isn't slower than just rendering everything. So to make that calculation fast, level designers placed large occlusion volumes inside major terrain shapes and big occluding objects like buildings, and during rendering, we could then test the bounds of entities against these volumes to avoid rendering anything the player couldn't see. Detail objects. Once we had outdoor sections running, it was clear they needed some form of high-frequency detail, so we added small foliage elements, like grass and shrubs, across the displacement terrain. But we knew we couldn't afford, which is to say we didn't have the time, to hand-place them all. So we built the Detail Object System, which generates small foliage elements automatically based on the displacement material. Each material specifies the type of foliage to place, along with a set of parameters. At map compile time, the system calculates random points on the surface and selects foliage to place there. Given performance constraints, there was still a fairly complex hand-authoring process for foliage texture sheets, allowing us to render all of them in a single pass.
Terrain and performance. Our performance budget was often a significant constraint when it came to combat, and even more so for combat on terrain surfaces. When NPCs move, they perform many small spatial probes to determine if they can safely navigate their chosen path. To help visualize it, imagine they can't see, and are constantly waving a stick in front of themselves to check if the way is clear. The performance cost of these probes increases with the complexity of the world geometry. Our terrain displacement system creates uneven surfaces using many polygons, far more than the perfectly flat floors found elsewhere. This meant that NPCs moving on coast terrain were more resource-intensive than in other areas, and that constraint dictated the scale of many encounters in this section of the game.
Blood toxin levels.
The bridge. This bridge section was inspired by the Deception Pass Bridge, just up the road from Valve's office. We initially built this section as a pure navigation puzzle, gradually layering more gameplay into it. It also became the primary test case for our players' edge friction. In our movement system, we subtly increase friction on the player's deceleration as they approach the edge of a surface. Players have never noticed it, likely because it aligns naturally with their goal of stopping at the edge to look down, matching human tendency to move more slowly and carefully near a drop. But it's a critical feature for this part of the game. We know this because at one point during development, we accidentally broke it, and suddenly all of our playtesters started repeatedly falling to their deaths.
Bridge playtesting. The bridge section was always a high point in playtests, with testers consistently having strong reactions to it. The tension they felt while slowly making their way over the girders was visible in their movements. Over time, we layered more challenges into the traversal, and playtests only became more entertaining to watch. From the train rumbling across the bridge and shaking the player, to a surprise head crab in a shack that seemed like a safe haven midway through, we did feel a little guilty relishing the playtesters' visible stress, but we weren't total monsters. After players made it across the bridge, they'd breathe a sigh of relief, disable the Combine shield, and then realize they had to return across the underside. Concerned they might be bored on the second trip, we decided to add a gunship to keep them company out on the girders.
Bridge Gunship. We were particularly happy with the gunship fight, despite it being tricky to set up given the level geometry. Being on the underside of the bridge allowed the gunship to move fully around the player, using all 3 dimensions to position itself above and below at different moments. The girders provide plenty of high-frequency cover, creating opportunities for the gunship's fire to produce a fun and dynamic visual and audio display.